What if your everyday choices were quietly rewriting your future? What if inflammation wasn't just a symptom, but a signal? What if fatigue, pain, weight changes, and brain fog all shared the same root? This is metabolic health, the engine behind your energy, your immune system, and your long-term wellness. Taking charge in metabolic education is White River Health rheumatologist, Dr. Sarah Luebker.
So over the last few sessions, we've really explored how diet and metabolism and mitochondrial function have underpinned both physical and mental health. But today we're going to shift our focus to external environment, and specifically, I'm going to focus on the powerful effects of chemicals that are called endocrine disruptors, or EDCs for short. Now, these are compounds that most of us, actually every single one of us, come into contact multiple times every day. We're going to uncover that they're in a lot of foods that we eat, water, plastics, and personal care products. And yet we rarely discuss them in clinical practice. So my why for uncovering this and discussing that today is actually unchanged. It's really the health of my young family, and I'll get into all of this soon. So I continue to not have any disclosures or receive any compensation for these talks. So here's the roadmap of what we're going to be talking about today. First, we need to understand what an endocrine disrupting chemical is, and what better definition than the Endocrine Society's own criteria. Then we'll walk through the top 3 categories identified in this 2024 Global EDC report. Talking about pesticides is number 1, plastics and plasticizers are number 2, and a group of forever chemicals that is PFAS or PFAS. I'll also briefly give you a bonus on obesogens, which is a new class of EDCs that are chemicals that really reprogram our metabolic set point and contribute to fat storage and can contribute to this obesity epidemic that we're now facing. But we're not only going to look at mechanisms. I'm going to share human data. And finally, we're going to finish and wrap all of this up with some hopeful and very practical interventions that you can take away from this talk. So let's get into what a definition of an EDC is. So this is strictly from the Endocrine Society, which is the global authority on this topic. So any endocrine disruptor is an exogenous, meaning outside of the body, chemical that interferes with hormonal action. And this can include things like mimicking hormones, blocking hormones, or altering the signal of any hormonal pathway. This field has exploded in the last decade, and thanks to advances in both molecular biology, toxicology, and even epidemiology, we understand this to a greater level today. Now, it's widely accepted that more than 1,000 chemicals meet criteria for endocrine disruption, and many are suspected outside of those 1,000. And they haven't been adequately studied because it's hard with ethics and with limited funding. But most importantly, EDCs are not obscure risk, and we're going to see by the end of this that they've been implicated in the pathophysiology of nearly every major chronic disease that we've talked about up to this point, specifically hormone-sensitive cancers, metabolic disease, and even neurodevelopmental disorders, infertility, and cardiovascular disease. And these, as you can see, are all very mainstream medicines. We just haven't been trained to necessarily identify or see them that way. So quickly, we need to ground ourselves in what the endocrine system is and how it works to understand what an endocrine disrupting chemical can do. So the endocrine system is this really complex network of glands that produce hormones. And then these hormones are secreted, they're little chemical messengers into the blood, and they can affect change on tissues that can be far away from the organ they were produced from. So once they're secreted into the bloodstream, they travel and then they land on specific organs and tissues. And that's what makes endocrine signaling so efficient. But it also makes it very susceptible to interference. When a hormone finally reaches its target, it binds to its receptor like a lock and key model. And then that triggers a complex cascade of responses. Now, these can regulate things that are critical to metabolism, sexual development, fertility, mood, sleep, bone turnover, and many more. But here's the problem. Synthetic chemicals can hijack this very delicate system. Many endocrine disruptors actually mimic natural hormones such as estrogen, thyroid hormones, and androgens, and others act as blockers. Either way, they create a whole lot of noise in a system that's designed for precision. So there's been 6 main classes of toxicity for EDCs. The first, I think we think of intuitively when we think of hormones, and that's reproduction. So EDCs can disrupt endocrine and testosterone pathways, affecting fertility, things like hormone-sensitive tissues, and also puberty timing. Secondly, this can be critical for development. The fetal endocrine system is the most vulnerable. Exposures during pregnancy can permanently alter organ development of that baby. They can alter brain wiring and hormone sensitivity. The third is metabolic, and this is hinting at the new class called obesogens, where EDCs are increasingly linked to increase insulin resistance and fat accumulation, essentially hijacking and contributing more fat burden to that individual. There is a fourth class of neurotoxic where evidence is mounting that links multiple EDCs to things like ADHD, autism, and even behavioral disorders. Early life exposure is a risk factor for that. Fifth, we have respiratory, where in utero exposures increase the risk of asthma and lung function impairment. And then finally, carcinogenic. Many EDCs are dually classified as carcinogenic, particularly for hormone-driven cancers like breast and prostate. So despite this clear science, our regulation has not yet caught up. The toxicology model that has been used by many agencies, such as the dose makes the poison, assumes this linear relationship between cause and harm. But with EDCs, what they don't understand is even tiny exposures at the wrong time, like in utero, can have massive downstream effects. Now, the Endocrine Society in 2009, so that was a while ago, raised an alarm stating that low dose effects are real and policy changes must evolve. Since then, multiple medical bodies, including the American Medical Association, has called for better oversight of EDCs based on this comprehensive data. The American Public Health Association urged for precautionary approach to reduce all exposures and given in the light of given accumulating evidence. And the American Chemical Society has also acknowledged the need for updated testing, education, and development of safer chemical alternatives. In 2013, ACOG, which is the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecology, issued a joint statement with the American Society of Reproductive Medicine. And they called for timely action to help patients identify and reduce exposures to toxic environmental agents, especially during critical windows. That very same year, British Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists released a very similar scientific impact paper, encouraging providers to inform their pregnant and preconception patients, as well as breastfeeding women, about sources and routes of chemical exposure so they could take action to minimize harm. Together, these statements really reflect a growing recognition of all of the data to this point. And yet, I'll tell you from my own personal experience of having 2 children in the last 3 years that I did not receive any of this counseling, and I had to find this information for myself. And I'm a physician, so imagine our patients who don't have that knowledge base. It's much harder. So this is the ACOG committee opinion really highlighting and calling for clinicians to be familiar with these chemical risks, local hazards, and how to integrate environmental health into reproductive care. And guys, that was over a decade ago. So how do EDCs cause harm? Unlike traditional toxins, EDCs do not follow a linear dose response pattern. The timing of exposure, and you're going to hear me say this multiple times because it's so important, during fetal development or puberty can matter more than any amount of dose itself. Tiny amounts, and we're talking parts per billion or even parts per trillion, can disrupt hormone signaling. And this is why many experts now reject the idea that there is even a safe threshold for EDCs. Exposure is everywhere, from lining of canned foods to baby bottles, cosmetics. The list goes on to household cleaners, toys, and even the receipts that we obtain. The problem isn't that there's a large exposure, it's the daily, layered exposures of dozens of sources that's a problem. So this is taken from a paper published by the Nature Review of Endocrinology in 2019, and they took the work from really experts in the field of cancer and modeled carcinogen based on these criteria. So as you can see, there's 10 different ways that EDCs can hijack hormone signaling. They can alter the synthesis of hormones, block them, they can activate receptors, they can modify how hormones are transported or metabolized in the body, and even change gene expression through epigenetic reprogramming. It's important because traditional toxicology often waits for disease outcomes to emerge, such as cancer, infertility, early puberty. But what can be helpful with identifying characteristics is that potentially we can flag chemicals that could be EDCs before cancer or harm occurs. So I include this slide to remind us that we've seen this before. This isn't entirely new. The tobacco industry denied causality for decades, even as evidence was piling up. Epidemiologic studies showed strong association with lung cancer as early as the 1950s. But because we couldn't run randomized human trials, the industry was able to dismiss the data as inconclusive. I really feel that EDCs are following a similar pattern. We have widespread exposure, biologic plausible mechanisms, and strong animal and even mechanistic data, but yet we hear the argument that the evidence is not yet strong enough. I don't think science has to require it to be perfect to have to act, especially when the risk of irreversible harm is so high. One of the clearest historical examples of hormonal disruption in EDCs with extreme long-term consequences is diethylstilbestrol. I'm going to call this DES for the future of the talk. Now, DES is one of the earliest and clearest examples of endocrine disruption causing generational harm. It's a synthetic estrogen, and it was given to pregnant women to prevent miscarriage. If you had spotting in the 1970s, you were given DES. But more than that, DES was in almost every prenatal vitamin, and it was used for 3 decades. The daughters of these women, we now refer to them as DES daughters, and they experienced dramatically higher rates of very rare vaginal cancers, reproductive cancers, kidney cancers, and early menopause. Even breast cancer risk was elevated. But the thing to remember is the mothers weren't always harmed and frequently were unchanged, but the next generation was. And this is the essence of endocrine disruption. It can be subtle at the time, and timed exposures can lead to long-term and sometimes transgenerational effects. So the very most vulnerable population, this is where the stakes get the highest, and that's my 2 children right there. Unborn babies, infants, and children are the highest and they're most vulnerable for several reasons. We know that EDCs cross placenta and they're also found in breast milk. So exposure starts before birth and continues during infancy. Children don't have detoxification organs that are mature enough until around the age of 6 to 10, depending on the study that you read. So even tiny hormonal disruption during critical windows can rewire organ systems and metabolism and brain development, and that can persist until adulthood. Now let's talk about children a little bit more. Children are uniquely vulnerable, not because of their physiology only, but because of behavior. They have a higher dose per pound of body weight risk, and they interact more closely with contaminated surfaces. They're always crawling, they're playing on the floor, they're putting everything in their mouths. And on top of that, like I said before, their little livers, which is their detoxification system, isn't fully developed. So they're essentially defenseless. And critically, the endocrine and neurological systems are still under construction. So it matters most to them because what happens when those organs are being developed can have downstream effects. And common products like toys, teethers, and lotions, even household dust, can have meaningful exposures when in such early life stages. So this is one of the most striking things to me, is this chemical legacy. And this is where the woman that is pregnant is affecting not only her baby, but her baby's baby. So the mother is the first generation, that's F0, that's the pregnant individual. F1 is the fetus or the unborn child, and F2 is the fetus's reproductive cells. So exposures that happen in the endocrine system are affecting your future grandchildren, and that is crazy to me. So now that we understand what exactly an endocrine disruptor is, we're going to get into some of the top examples. So glyphosate is what's called Roundup, and it's the most widely used herbicide in the entire world. Its use exploded in the 1990s with the introduction of genetically engineered Roundup-ready crops designed to survive repeated spraying of glyphosate. So once its patent expired, the usage really skyrocketed. And it's not just in agriculture, but now it's on lawns and parks and golf courses, and essentially very hard to escape. In fact, in a CDC analysis of urine samples from 2013 to 2014, over 81% of participants had detectable glyphosate levels in their urine. And that number likely has increased since a decade ago. Exposure now is not limited to farms. Glyphosate has been found in cereals, grains, legumes, baby food, household dust, and drinking water. Anyone eating conventionally grown plant food is getting trace amounts daily. Glyphosate impacts 8 of the 10 EDC key characteristics. Beyond its agricultural use, it acts in a cellular level in ways that clearly identify it as an endocrine disruptor. It can bind to hormone receptors. It can mimic and block their natural ligands. It also disrupts hormone synthesis and alters how hormones are broken down or transported throughout the body. Perhaps one of the most dangerous things it can do is trigger epigenetic changes, and that's what we were talking about with transgenerational, reprogramming gene expression in hormone-sensitive cells of the reproductive, thyroid, and brain. Now, glyphosate doesn't just affect one hormone. It's been shown to interfere with estrogen, androgen, thyroid, and even melatonin. Glyphosate exposure is not just theoretical. We have human data linking it to reproductive harm. There's a study called the Ontario Farm Study where they couples that with preconception glyphosate exposure had a 43% increased risk of late spontaneous abortion. A separate Indiana study showed that higher maternal glyphosate levels during pregnancy were associated with shorter gestational length, and that's a known risk factor for many neonatal complications. And then thirdly, in a pesticide applicator population, so parents that their job was to apply the glyphosate, they had increased risk of children having developmental delay and developmental problems. So these are all supporting the idea that exposures early and during pregnancy have very tragic outcomes. Another pesticide that I'll talk about is DDT, and I'm not going to pronounce that for y'all. And this is an organochlorine insecticide, and it was used heavily during the mid-20th century. Though it was banned in the US in the 1970s, 1972 to be exact, it breaks down into something called DDE, and that's incredibly persistent. And it's still measurable in the environment and wildlife and in human tissues. We know that this is now classified as an endocrine disrupting chemical because of its ability to interfere with estrogen, androgens, thyroid, and insulin signaling. We have consistent human and animal studies showing prenatal or early life exposures were linked to urogenital birth defects, reduced fertility, and possibly increased testicular cancer risk. And it's also now an obesogen. They alter fat cell development and metabolism long after the initial exposure. Now, chlorpyrifos is one of the most widely used organophosphate pesticides globally today. Historically, it was applied in agriculture, food processing, landscaping. Despite its known toxicity, it's only recently been attempted to be banned by the EPA in 2021, but unfortunately that got denied and overturned in 2023, allowing continued exposure today in the US. Humans are exposed by multiple routes. Produce that's not organic, air, dust, and contaminated soil. Alarmingly, pyrophos has actually been detected in breast milk, cord blood of newborns, semen, and even infant hair, confirming exposure during our most vulnerable children. Mechanistically, this disrupts the cholinesterase and endocannabinoid signaling, which are parts of the brain critical for neurological development. It also is known to interfere with thyroid hormone pathways. Epidemiologic studies also link this to developmental delay and Parkinson's disorder in elderly. So now that we've talked about pesticides, we're going to move on to the next group, which is plastics. Now, plastics are used in nearly every corner of our lives, and this industry has exploded in the last 50 years. It is now grossing over 5 trillion globally. Many of the chemicals used to produce plastics or to stabilize the plastics are endocrine disrupting as well. These include bisphenols and phthalates. Those are the two that I'm going to talk about today, but this really could be a whole week's lecture. And these are well-documented endocrine disruptors. These chemicals leach during everyday use, especially when plastics are heated. Think about baby bottles, food containers, water bottles, plastic utensils, even canned food linings. And it's also in personal use. It's not just personal use, sorry. As plastics break down, they contribute to environmental contamination. So it's in our water, soil, food chains, and even human tissues. It's been said, and studies document ranging between 6 months to a year, that we each eat a credit card amount of plastic here in the United States. So bisphenols is kind of the big prototype of plastics. It's a group or a class of plastics. Most famous, we would say BPA or bisphenol A. Bisphenols are used in hard plastics, epoxy lining of canned foods and beverages, receipts, medical devices, and even eyeglasses. So exposure can be really hard, if not near unavoidable. It's found in 90% of urine in the United States, and also 70% of umbilical cord blood and 80% of amniotic fluid samples. That means that fetal exposure is not hypothetical. And switching to BPA-free doesn't necessarily make it safer. Many of these are BPS or BPF, which are analogs and have similar estrogenic activity or endocrine disrupting properties. And it's worth noting that not all bisphenols are used in food packaging. This term TBBPA is a flame retardant bisphenol, and it's used in circuit boards and electronics, but concerningly, it's found in household dust, and it has the same BPA endocrine disrupting effects, particularly on estrogen and thyroid hormones. So this is a call to action from the IPEN, which is the International Pollutant Elimination Network, and it has a campaign in many languages to minimize BPA footprint in our children. So what many people don't realize about plastics is they aren't static and they leach, especially when that plastic is heated, or there's acidity, or there's fat, or UV exposure. So some of the worst offenders can be canned tomatoes in the can lining because they're acidic. K-cups combine heat, pressure, and plastic. And even a coffee cup, like say going to Starbucks, which I'm guilty of right now, has plastic lining, and that can release particles under heat, and lids can shed microplastics. And think about that bottle of water that's sitting in your car. If it tastes like plastic, it's because it really is. There's microplastics, and it can be considered a microplastic incubator. So the key takeaway from this slide is that these are not rare exposures. They're daily and habitual, but the good thing is they're actually easily modifiable with the right awareness. So what about the BPA science? This is probably our most well-known endocrine disruptor with the most data. So it was identified as an estrogen mimic as early as the 1930s. BPA is best known for that ability because it binds avidly to estrogen receptors, including in the brain. Even at low doses, can alter receptor density and tissue sensitivity to natural hormones. One of the most disturbing things that I found was this interference during fetal and early childhood development because BPA has been implicated in hormone-sensitive cancers like breast cancer in the younger and younger generation. Structurally, BPA actually resembles estrogen, which is why it can trigger similar signaling cascades. And again, BPA-free doesn't mean bisphenol-free. BPA and BPF have nearly identical endocrine disrupting effects. Beyond its receptor binding, BPA can cause epigenetic changes, especially through DNA methylation, and it alters gene expression during neuroendocrine pathways that are tied to reproduction, metabolism, and even behavior. So estrogen receptors have been called promiscuous, and that's because they can bind to many things that have a similar steroid structure and ring. Estrogen receptors are found in the brain, in the bone, in the heart, and in reproductive tissues. So because of their widespread distribution, they mediate a wide range of physiologic processes, from neurodevelopment to bone health and vascular tone. Because of their flexible binding affinity, these receptors are really susceptible to endocrine disrupting chemicals at large. But it's important to know that EDCs don't just tie into estrogen. They can bind to androgens, which produce testosterone, progesterone, and thyroid hormone. Further, BPA science has shown that estrogen is not the only thing that's affected, and we're going to talk about this right now. So when BPA can interfere with testosterone and thyroid signaling in cell and primate models, and so that is concerning. But one of the striking things that is different about BPA is that it really is avid for this receptor called estrogen-related receptor gamma, and that is highly prone, or that's highly expressed in the fetal brain and in the placenta. So this is targeting directly mechanistically. It prefers, so if a pregnant woman ingests PPA, it's going to bind first to her baby that's not born in the placenta over herself. As of the last 1 to 2 years, there's been nearly 500 human studies that investigated BPA, and the clearest associations routinely involve the reproductive, behavioral, and energy metabolism. There's even emerging evidence that BPA may contribute to early puberty in girls, reduce birth weight, and preeclampsia, along with well-established links to PCOS, reduced semen quality, and breast cancer. Now, a group of women undergoing IVF with infertility issues, BPA was associated with poor egg quality as opposed to women that did not have higher BPA. Animal data also support this, showing disrupted uterine and ovarian development after BPA exposure. Now, men, BPA in industrial settings have been linked to lower sperm quality and altered sexual function, but we still don't have the data yet to know if low-dose everyday exposures can carry the same risk. But I think that raises concern. Okay, so that was a lot on BPA. Now we're going to shift gears to this other group of plastics that's called phthalates. And this is a group of plasticizers, and they make plastic flexible. They make it soft, durable, and movable. Because of that, industry now uses phthalates in anything that's labeled fragrance because it can hold on to clothes or skin better because of its ability. Unless if it specifically says phthalate free or use of essential oils, you should consider it having phthalates in it. They're particularly common in things like polyvinyl chloride or PVC. Again, fragrances are huge, and that's why it's now advised to avoid many scented products. And production is massive. Over 4.9 million metric tons are produced globally. Because of how widely they are used, it's easy to consider how hard it is to avoid them. They migrate out of products quickly, and phthalates are now considered one of the most pervasive endocrine disrupting chemical families in the world. Phthalates have been found in urine, blood, umbilical cord, and even amniotic fluid. So our babies are exposed to this before they've even taken a single breath. Like BPA, phthalates cross placenta and guarantee exposure if mom is exposed, which is almost universal. Regulatory bodies have started to respond to growing concerns about phthalates, but there's still a really long way to go. In 2022, the FDA deauthorized or removed 23 phthalates from food packaging, but the thing that was concerning about that is it seemed like most of those weren't in use anymore anyway. 9 others, including the ones listed on the screen, are still permitted despite all of the scientific petitions asking for their removal. A landmark 2014 report from Consumer Product Safety Commission and its advisory panel analyzed 261 food items and found that direct ingestion with foods and drinks and medications were the primary exposure source for pregnant women. Another study found in fast food chains here in America that 85% of fast food samples confirmed high levels of phthalate. So confirming that our average American diet is the major route of ongoing exposure. Phthalates were first recognized as an endocrine disruptor because of their ability to interfere with male fetal development, particularly suppression of androgen production and this hormone called insulin-like hormone 3, which is critical for testes descent. This disruption has been linked to birth defects like cryptorchism, hypospadias, as well as long-term effects like reduced both sperm production and quality, lower testosterone levels, and increased risk of fertility or testicular cancer. What's particularly striking is that both high doses and low doses are included within these environmental ranges and have been shown to reduce testosterone levels in adult mice. So here's some more animal studies. This is most robust findings of testosterone suppression were with rodent mice models and also primate monkey studies. Some human epidemiologic studies suggested similar trends, particularly in occupational exposures or high risk groups, but the data was less consistent due to the variability in exposure timing and population factors. So what did human studies show? So this I found was very fascinating. This was a case control of 176 men. So they compared a group of infertile men from a reproductive clinic to a group of fertile men that were attending a childbirth class. Urinary phthalate concentrations were significantly higher in the infertile group, and those men also had statistically decreased levels of hormones called inhibin B, total testosterone, FSH, LH, and insulin-like factor 3. So that was the hormone crucial for testes development and descent. So that aligned perfectly with the other animal studies. While human data is more variable than animal data, studies like this show compelling biologic plausibility with a clear hormonal signature consistent with phthalate toxicity. Now is a really great time to discuss a population level decline in total testosterone in the US men. So this is a Massachusetts male aging study, and it showed that testosterone declined by 1% per year, which may not sound like a lot, but if you say it like this, a 65-year-old man in 2002 had roughly 15% lower testosterone than a 65-year-old man in 1987. And that held constant when they arranged for obesity, BMI, and lifestyle. Testosterone deficiency, alarmingly, is now affecting 1 in 5 adolescent and young adult men. This is data from NHANES data showing that total testosterone has declined significantly from 1999 to 2016, even in men with normal BMI. So this isn't just an aging issue. Young, otherwise healthy men are showing lower testosterone levels than they were just 2 decades ago. So what about in the ovary? So ovarian dysfunction has been shown with phthalates both in the developing and mature ovaries, including increased oxidative stress, decreased estrogen signaling, and follicle dysregulation. Look at this. I'm not going to go through each detail, but this isn't just blunt hormone suppression. Phthalates intricately interfere with the entire architecture of ovarian development. from the reproducing primordial follicle on your left side of the screen to inhibiting antral follicle growth and disrupting corpus luteus formation. Phthalates are involved at every single level. So to me, this helps explain the rising concerns about fertility or subfertility in women today. All right, so we're moving on to PFAS, called PFAS or forever chemicals. Now, this refers to a large group of synthetic chemicals used in things like water or stain-resistant carpets, nonstick pans, food wrappers, rain jackets, and a lot of things in between, unfortunately. They're extremely pervasive and persistent, hence the name forever chemicals. Many are now recognized as persistent organic pollutants and are banned under certain international treaties. Unfortunately, we are exposed through drinking water, food packages, and dust. PFAS, unfortunately, accumulates in the body over time, and they interfere with all the things we've talked about before: hormone production, transport, and breakdown of hormones. So this was a study in Beijing that showed that PFAS was found in 100% of maternal and cord blood samples, confirming placental transfer. PFAS levels were negatively correlated with maternal thyroid function, but did not show consistent level decline in the fetus. So while cord hormone levels were not statistically decreased in this study, other studies did show that. So over time, this has been shown to suppress thyroid function, which might be critical in the developing fetus. Well, that's unfortunate, but we're going to move on. So the outline didn't carry through, but we're going to move on now to, oh, there it is. Okay. We're going to talk now about obesogens, which is maybe one of the most cool topics of EDCs. And it really can help explain why obesity is on the rise today, despite people saying, I'm eating clean, I'm doing everything I know how to do. Wouldn't it be disfortunate if you're eating an apple that is not organic and the pesticides are hijacking your metabolism and causing fat cell accumulation despite not having calories? And that's kind of what obesogens do. They're a class of endocrine disrupting chemicals that program our metabolic pathways towards fat storage, especially when exposures happen in early life. So these are some of the references. If you're interested in this, I encourage you to look at. And I really liked this lecture, Obesogens, a Unifying Theory for Global Rise in Obesity. I think that if you have an interest in this, I would direct you to this and other work from Dr. Robert Lustig. So how do these work? Obesogens work in three main ways. The first is endocrine mimicry, such as chemicals like BPA or phthalates, all the ones that we've already talked about. They bind to a particular receptor called PPAR gamma, and that stimulates fat cell formation. The second way they work is mitochondrial disruption. So channel all of the things we learned about mitochondrial disruption from the first talk. But this one's a little more subtle. It's a little less obvious. Under normal conditions, remember, mitochondria create reactive oxygen species. And that's our body's way of saying we're full, we have satiety. So what obesogens do is they ramp up reactive oxygen species. So the body is triggering insulin to be secreted, but then they also downregulate antioxidant enzymes. So you don't have a way to deal with these reactive oxygen species. So the buildup of oxidative stress plus the false cellular signaling of energy surplus, when there really isn't any, you've just eaten that apple with pesticides on it, that can drive insulin resistance, promote fat storage, and disrupt your hunger regulation. So the third is this called developmental programming, and this happens in the womb. It can epigenetically rewire how metabolic organs like your liver, your pancreas, and your brain function. So guys, this is crazy, but this is real. Fructose is a dietary obesogen. The work of Dr. Robert Lustig really emphasizes fructose as a metabolic poison, not because of it has calories, but because of how it's processed. Unlike glucose, fructose, we learned about painstakingly, some might say, on the first lecture, that it's metabolized entirely by the liver. and that leads to fat creation from sugar. That's the process of de novo lipogenesis. So because fructose generates fat above and beyond the calories it's given, by definition, is an obesogen. It drives insulin resistance, liver fat accumulation, and metabolic dysfunction. And it's in 73% of our processed foods in the grocery stores. So this is a list from one of the papers that I referenced that I pointed you to of all the different classifications of obesogens, and many are in everyday sources. So everybody take a deep breath with me. I know that this can seem very overwhelming, but there's some really good news here. There are practical, evidence-based steps that we can do right now to protect ourselves and our family. I'm going to show you a review article from 2021 that systematically reviewed 16 studies on nutritional and lifestyle interventions that had positive exposure, that decreased exposures to EDCs. So what can we do at a high level? Well, we can stop plastic containers and water bottles. We can minimize as much canned foods and beverages as we can, and we can minimize fast food. We want to encourage organic, whole food, produce in particular, antioxidant support, and alter personal care products, looking for things that are paraben and phthalate free. Even unscented would be better. And support your gut microbiome with probiotics. So let's look at what I call the highlight reel from these 16 studies. We're not going to go through all 16, but these are the ones that I liked the most. So this is a study from 2011 looking at plastic-free diet in families. So it was a non-randomized, non-blinded crossover, meaning they served as their own control for just 3 days. So 3 days of fresh organic fruits and vegetables without canned foods, plastic, and nonstick cookware dramatically decreased the amount of endocrine disrupting chemicals by over half. Look at this one. This is a same randomized crossover trial. So they, again, served as their own control, where the intervention was 5 days of fresh soup versus 5 days of canned soup. So urinary BPA increased by 1,221% after eating canned soup as opposed to fresh soup. This is another study of 15 healthy women that just took vitamin C. That's very easy. All of us can take vitamin C. They had some decreased in their polychlorinated bisphenols. It's something. It's easy to take vitamin C. So if that's something that you need help with antioxidant support, that's an easy reach. And in this non-randomized trial of 30 college-aged women, they simply had educational sessions like what I'm giving you right now, and support for reducing fast and processed foods and BPA exposure. And over 2 months, they had almost half, or actually more than half, decrease of BPA. And interestingly, their menstrual pain improved as well. So in this study, switching from phthalate and paraben-free products had statistically significant decline in endocrine disrupting chemicals. And children switched to organic food for 5 days, had decrease in 7.2, which is just heart-wrenching, honestly, of this chlorpyrifos, which we know is not good for their little brains, to 1.7. So now I'm going to just take a quick second and try to synthesize all of this information that I've given you over the last 3 weeks. So this is summary from talk 1. And Josh and I were talking about how did we start? Because it does seem overwhelming. And at the end, everybody has a handout, is what's called a chemical hit list. And this was from Vani Hari. She goes by Food Babe. And we started with that. We literally tossed out anything that was on that hit list of chemicals, and I didn't want them in our family. So things like artificial dyes, they were out. Preservatives, they were out. Synthetic sweeteners, we do our best. Read ingredient labels. This is what I teach my patients every single day. Jamie is here with me. She scribes for me, and she knows I say, if you cannot pronounce it, I don't want you eating it. So that can be the best thing that you can do. You don't have to memorize a list of chemicals, but if you cannot conceptualize what this ingredient is, there's no business for you to be eating it. Avoid ultra-processed seed oils. From my first talk, you know all about this. Instead, I want you choosing grass-fed beef and organic poultry if you can, or wild-caught fish, organic vegetables. If you have to take anything from the choose instead, make sure your vegetables are organic, and add clean fats, olive oil, avocado, and butter. Those are things that actually help your mitochondrial membrane. Your cells need good fats. Snack ideas. Organic fruit and peanut butter is a great snack. We eat a lot of raw nuts. We eat a lot of cheese, veggies. Make sure your hummus is clean. It can actually be tricky to avoid a lot of seed oils. The other tip I would say is shop the perimeter of the store. And if you have more than 5 ingredients on a box or a bag, pause and make sure you know what each of those ingredients are. So I literally scrolled through my phone. This is like, I get kind of annoyed when people are like, you're taking away all of my food. I can't even eat anything. And that's not true, guys. We have real food that we can eat. So just yesterday, my husband made enchilada chicken skillet. We had this earlier this week, cheesy baked mushroom. We didn't have the pasta. We've been eating on the summer berry salad for weeks. It's so easy to make, and just like a good pot roast. So like I'm saying, eat real food. I'm not saying you have to go on a particular diet. So let's summarize talk 2. I want you to prevent insulin spikes and energy crashes. So in order to do that, set yourself up right. Start eating protein in the morning. And I'm talking like it doesn't have to be, you know, breakfast. I've sometimes had leftovers from the night before. If you want eggs, meat, go for it. Have a high protein yogurt that does not have added sugar. We can train ourselves to not need this amount of sweetness. So yogurt, I could have a whole nother talk about that, but have an unsweetened yogurt and add whole berries to it. You don't need all of the sugar in yogurt. We don't need cereals, muffins, and juice. Swap that for a high protein breakfast. Increase daily movement. So walk after meals, as little as 10 minutes can make a huge trajectory in improvement. Start resistance training. So that's picking up some weights, just as little as 3 times a week. And then stop grazing. Give yourself time to enter fat burning mode. And then if you want, there's some information in your handout. If you want to experiment with intermittent fasting or a ketogenic diet, that would be above and beyond. So from today's talk, dietary, what we talked about, this is the only time I'm going to read the slides to you. We're going to choose fresh or frozen, organic. We're not going to choose canned or packaged foods. Avoid drinking beverages from cans or plastic water bottles as much as you can. Try cooking at home and cooking in bulk so that you don't have to cook each and every meal. Or buy organic produce, meat, and dairy whenever possible. Never microwave food in plastic. Store your food in glass or stainless steel or ceramic. Choose products for personal care that do not contain endocrine disrupting chemicals when you can. Use mineral-based sunscreens. Avoid fragranced items such as perfume, cologne, and fragrance lotions. In your home, consider getting a HEPA filter vacuum. We don't yet have one, I don't believe, but that's something we might talk about. Wash your hands with regular soap, not scented soap. Avoid things like candles, detergents, and fragrance soaps. I really like this app. If anybody needs help, this is the EWG Healthy Living app, and they literally have over 200,000 products, and they also have a screen. So you can take a snapshot and upload it, and they'll give you a breakdown of endocrine disrupting chemicals. They can do things like healthy foods. There's one specifically for it's called beauty something. Look it up. But there's something specifically for beauty additives and things like that. Personal care. Okay, so the most significant insoluble exposures that we're going to end on today is our water. And on this slide, I want you to look and see the list of contaminants detected in our local water supply. On the left is where we live. It's Sulphur Rock, and on the right is here in Batesville. So these results are directly from the environmental working group, the same group that puts on the app that I just shared with you. And I really encourage you, if you live outside of Batesville, put in your own zip code and start becoming familiar with your water supply. Some of these contaminants, like nitrates, where Josh and I live in Sulphur Rock, are from agricultural runoff, and they're best removed with a processed filter called reverse osmosis. Other contaminants that are used to clean the water, like chlorine and the byproducts of chlorine, are under a high quality carbon filtration might be sufficient, but different levels of carbon filtration work differently. So really be familiar with what water filtration system you have. And keep in mind that not all filters are equal. Some only reduce chlorine, while others are more comprehensive. That's why it's important to start researching the type of filtration system that you have for your household. A key point I recently learned while I was going through this was, and I really want to emphasize for you so you don't stumble on this later, is one of the exposures of chemicals doesn't just come from drinking the water. So some of these, particularly some of the cleaners that break down, such as this bromo dichloromethane and others, become volatile when heated. So think about that 10 or 20-minute shower. You're actually getting more chloroform in the body than if you drink that water. And that happens because these compounds vaporize easily in the steam, and then they're not only rapidly absorbed in your pores that are expanding in the hot water, but you're also breathing this. So some research estimates that exposure through showering can be up to 10 times higher than through ingestion. Because reverse osmosis removes not just contaminants, I also want to put a plug in that it removes some essential minerals like calcium and magnesium. So I recommend replacing these through diet or supplementation. So for me, this has always been personal. My mom had cancer, 2 different kinds, in her 30s. And that's why I'm currently and always exploring different modalities to reduce my exposures to carcinogens. We are currently talking about a whole home filtration system as opposed to just individual. You can get them for each shower because that's a long-term kind of a low-level exposures like this are linked to things like oxidative stress, reproductive harm, and then elevated risks of bladder and colon cancer. So as I close this series, I want to leave you with this challenge. We all know the importance of a solid financial plan. We save, we invest, and we prepare for the future. But do you give the same attention to your own health? Think about it. We create a retirement account as early as our 20s or 30s, but we wait until we're symptomatic to start thinking about hormones, energy, metabolism, or brain health. This is my challenge to you. Start creating a health plan today. Plan for optimal health. Start with just 2 changes a month. You may not be able to tackle all of this right now, and that's okay. Whether you're in your 20s or even younger, for some of us in the audience planning for fertility later, I want you to start thinking about yourself 10 years from now. If you're in your 40s, preparing if you're a woman for menopause, or if you're a man, there's a thing called andropause. You want to preserve your testosterone and vitality. The decisions you make now compound over time. But the very best part, this doesn't require perfection. It starts with knowledge and awareness, which is what I'm doing right now. But having knowledge alone isn't going to change anything. A move to healthier you begins with small and consistent steps. Start by cleaning up your food, your home, and your exposures, because the best time to invest in your health was actually 10 years ago. The second best time is today. Thank you.